Hi, welcome to Sustain Talks, the podcast crafted to enlighten individuals and businesses on the path to becoming more sustainable and socially responsible. I'm Sam Candy, CEO of Responsible Futures, an organisation that supports businesses through consulting and training. Today, I am delighted to be in conversation with a very old friend of mine, Mike Seaman, CEO of Racoon Media Group, a dynamic media business focused on enabling people to live healthy, active, and sustainable lifestyles. Their events, you may know the National Running Show, the National Cycling Show, National Outdoor Expo. Gosh, there's so many of them. But when it comes to exhibitions, they do produce significant carbon emissions. And so I'm thrilled that we are also joined today by Charlie Cotton, founder of ecollective and Racoon Media Group's sustainability partner. But before we get started, I just wanted to say a massive congratulations. Mike, you just completed the SDW 100-mile trail run from Winchester to Eastbourne. I think that's worth mentioning. What an achievement.
I haven't talked about it much, have I? It's all over social media. Yeah, no, thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah, talk about putting your money where your mouth is when you're running the national running show. So well done on that. But let's start with you, Mike. Do you want to tell us a little bit more? I've briefly mentioned Racoon Media Group, but tell us a little bit more about how it came about and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks, and that was an amazing introduction, by the way. You were very smooth. You should be like a TV presenter. Um, from us, so I founded Raccoon in 2016. I've been working in the events industry for a long time. I'm 20 plus years in, and I wanted to do something that I loved and that I was passionate about. And as you've said, I'm a keen runner. It's what I do in my spare time, and I had this idea for the National Running Show. And so the show was born. I left my safe corporate job, ran the show. It traded for the first time in 2018, and we realised there was an appetite for this type of event, and we created more, and we grew the team, and we tried to grow them responsibly and with an ethos as a business. And we're now here, sort of 6 years later, with 42 staff and 17 exhibitions across the US and the UK, and significant growth plans. So we do generally try and focus, as you say, on things that enable passion-led communities. So as a business, we're very focused on bringing people together to create meaningful connections. And the joy for me is actually going to a live event and seeing people come together and get an experience that they otherwise couldn't get if we weren't there. So I love what I do. My hobby is my job. I've got a group of mates that I work with. It's really quite fun. We're very passionate, and we like to do things with a purpose. We don't just like to take. So part of our sustainability journey, and we are very much on a journey. We don't profess to be experts by any stretch, but our journey is about trying to give back to the community. And given that a lot of our shows are about enabling people to be active outside, you kind of need to love the planet a little bit. So that's where our sustainability journey started. And then we met the lovely Charlie, who's been with us for years now and has helped us sort of really evolve that thinking into a meaningful strategy.
Oh, that's great. And I think it really comes across, I follow you on many social media channels, and that passion and the care that you do have for your communities that you work with. I really think that comes across, and being a responsible business and caring about your community is so important in business. Your annual sustainability report recently came out about a month ago. Well done. I thought it was a great read to see all the work that you're doing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the journey towards sustainability and the specific initiatives that you've undertaken to reduce your environmental impact?
Yeah, I think I could start from the top line and then I might let Charlie sort of cover some of the detail. But taking it back to what we wanted to do, the annual sustainability report is a way of us being held accountable. So I think it's always really nice as a soundbite to go, we're going to be super green and sustainable and save the planet, but are you actually doing it? And how are you proving to people that you're doing it? And actually allowing them to disprove that you're doing it. And what I found is that with sustainability, if you put your flag above the parapet, that people will throw rocks at it. And actually, we encourage that because I think that gives you some learnings. And I don't want to just sit there and say, hey, we're amazing, because we ain't. We haven't got it all figured out yet, but we are trying, and we're willing to show you what we're doing, and we'll publish it. And if you think we're doing it wrong, call us out, and then we can learn. So that's where that came from. In terms of sort of trying to tackle this beast, because it's really quite daunting for somebody who's an exhibition organizer by trade. I mean, that's what I've always done. I'm not a sustainability guru. And actually, if people come up to you and say, you're rubbish, you're bad for the environment, you don't really feel qualified to respond. So I think the first thing we needed to do was get an expert alongside us who actually knew what they were talking about, which was Charlie. We decided that the thing we were going to tackle first was carbon. It felt like the most obvious place to start. It felt like that's where the conversation was. And then we broke it down into smaller chunks rather than just trying to be green. And the sort of the four key sectors were the things that we do, the things that our exhibitors do, the things that our suppliers do, and the things that our visitors do. And that enabled us to sort of make it into more meaningful chunks. And then you could have a strategy against each of those four, which if you're then reviewing it every year, you can see how you can start to make incremental change to achieve a benefit. And there is a fifth strand in there, which is about offsetting and that kind of stuff. But we kind of decided quite early on that whilst offsetting is important and we must all plant trees and look at carbon extraction, that's really good. It's actually a bit of a sticking plaster for your conscience. And if you've got to go and set fire to 100 pandas and then go and plant a load of trees to make up for it, doesn't feel very nice. So what we wanted to do was actually concentrate on changing our behaviours first before we then mitigated them. Charlie, is that fair? I don't know where the pandas comment came from, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So in terms of the kind of work the geeky work we've been doing in the background is that we measure the carbon footprint of every single event that Racoon do. And actually measuring one event is a nightmare. There are so many different things going on, from how do people get there, how much electricity is going on in the venue, how are they heating it, what's going in the bin. You could go on and on and on. So we're now got a system up and running that we're measuring every single one. And we're also doing the other bits. So the kind of employee footprint, I suppose, and that would be like the office that Racoon has, any staff trips, any other bits and pieces, the website, the work. So the idea is we try and uncover everything. Where are all your emissions coming from? And the idea of doing that slightly kind of data number crunching work is to be really kind of strategic with time. So there's a million things any company should be doing, and Racoon would be no different. But what we're trying to do is say, what are the most effective uses of our time? Where are there opportunities to reduce those emissions when you've only got so many hours in the day? And ideally, in a perfect world, there are things that also make the event better and also work from the business point of view in terms of the finances. And that's where I think the relationship works quite well, because I think what's quite nice on our side is that Racoon are quite entrepreneurial. And so actually those kind of, Mike mentioned rocks being thrown at him earlier, but that same kind of idea, we can chuck ideas out there. Loads of them won't be that great, but they will all reduce emissions. But what we're trying to do is find those kind of sweet spots where actually we think this can make the event better and reduce emissions at the same time. And it's a constant element of kind of like, I don't know if Mike feels this way, but a bit of like trial and error. We'll try this, it might work, it might not, and then we kind of go again, which is a bit relentless, but I think it works.
I think that's where the market is, right? If you genuinely want to be sustainable, there isn't a blueprint to follow yet. There isn't you must do this and then you're there. And actually, we've talked about this, the definition of net zero is changing. And that's frustrating because you think you've done it and then you haven't. So I think actually you have to accept trial and error. I think it's quite a good thing.
Yeah. Is there any bits that have been through that journey in the measurement? Is there any bits of that have been particularly difficult? I mean, especially for other event organisers that are going to go into this, and pretty much most companies organise events. Have you found there's one bit that was really difficult or really surprising with the results that you expected something different?
I think for me, nothing overly surprising. I think it's actually, as we all predicted, I think that the biggest difficulty with events is actually scope 3. It's how your visitors get there. And actually that's the largest societal problem that, whilst we have to account for, is quite difficult for us as a mere exhibition organizer to change its entirety. We can impact change, but and actually just by having an active strategy around that and some active marketing, you can actually influence change. It did surprise me. In terms of what's difficult, I mean, Charlie, you have to do the measuring. What's the hardest bit, mate?
Yeah, well, I learned a few bits actually. So on the positive side, venues, I think, are doing some really cool work in the industry of making measuring the footprint of using one venue for one day a lot easier, and some are even just providing that number, so you don't even have to go digging for it, which I think is really cool. On the opposite side, one I find quite hard is perhaps exhibitors. I find that's quite hard to kind of start getting data out of them that we can then start to use. And Mike's one is the classic for the industry, that how are the attendees, the people getting to the event in the first place? I'd say for comparison, Racoon actually doing quite a good job on that in terms of the data that's being collected, which is making my life easier. But from an industry point of view, if I'm talking to 10 event companies, I think I'd probably find that as the biggest gap so far, is where the hell are people coming from and how are they getting to that event?
Yeah, so do you do that through asking them to say how they're coming and where they're coming from? And
Absolutely, simply just asking them the question. And I think also, once you ask the question, you gather the data, you can see the impact, and actually then you can do something about it. And I think we're in the doing something about it stage, and we started a comms campaign last year to visitors, encouraging them to card there or use public transport or think about how they were getting there. And actually it did make a difference. And actually we did see that work. And I think it can be, again, if you look at that fear, exhibition organisers are often scared of addressing travel, because it does. How do you tell someone how to get somewhere? I mean, it really isn't within your element of control, but actually is within your element of influence, and it's not an excuse to ignore it. I think you should actually encourage your visitors to travel more sustainably, even if just for the last mile of the journey, because you can make a difference. You know, if it's an international event and they've had to fly in for it, could you get them all to travel in a shuttle bus from the airport as opposed to everyone taking taxis? The impact of that over thousands and thousands of people can be quite extreme.
yeah, it really can. And I think it is about that storytelling as well, and sharing, you know, one of the things that about all of your events is that community. They're probably people that do care about the environment, you know, because they're outdoors all the time, so they see the changes in climate change and where they are.
I don't think that's unique to our community. I actually think if I speak to most people at the moment, they are conscious of the environment. They just don't know what to do. And actually, I think everybody feels like the problem is too big and it's something that I can't solve. And it's too big for any one of us to solve, but we can all do a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that if we all take responsibility for ourselves, and if we all did a little bit less, it doesn't mean not doing anything at all. But if everybody cared, then we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. You recently got to net zero scope 1 and 2 emissions from your headquarters. Can you tell us a bit? Did you make some changes in your energy?
Yeah, I think that Charlie can probably talk through that in more detail than me, but essentially it's just a request to change the energy provider, which made, frankly, no difference to us on the ground in the business, but, you know, is a responsible choice that didn't really cause us any harm, and actually made a bit of an impact. So is there anything you'd like to add to that, Charlie? Or?
No, that's it, spot on. So when we measure the carbon footprint of a company, the carbon jargon side of me and the kind of the paperwork is I have to split it into these 3 sections: scope 1, 2, and 3. And basically, I judge a company more on them taking action on scope 1 and 2, because these are the things that are very much Racoon's footprint and no one else's. if Racoon aren't going to change their energy supplier in their office, who the hell will? Whereas every other part of their business is kind of their footprint, but it's kind of someone else's too. So when they use a venue for that day, it is also Racoon's footprint, but it's kind of the venue's footprint as well, because they're renting it out to you for that day. Same for travelers, they're deciding how they get from A to B, so on and so on and so on. So we always encourage companies to focus first on reducing the things they have the most control over, because what a great place to start. Just take control of that before we start telling everyone else what they should be doing when it comes to sustainability. So it was I'm glad to hear, Mike, that it was a kind of an easy one, and it's now done, it's dusted, so we can kind of move on to the more challenging steps. To give it a bit of context, it's perhaps not the biggest picture in terms of where the total footprint comes on, but it's a great place just to say, job done, and we can now move on. So yeah, it's zero emissions for scope 1 and 2 now, and it's now on to the next point.
Anything else that you did around the headquarters to make any significant changes, or any changes that you've made?
There's lots of micro adjustments which would bore you to death if we went through them. Nothing of scale and note. But I think, again, just continuously looking at what we do and reviewing it on an ongoing basis and recording it. So Charlie has us all recording everything that we do across the 4 categories that I mentioned earlier. And there's a lot of data that gets pumped in. And actually, it's an investment of time and personnel. But that consciousness around it, and I think this is probably the best word when you're talking to event organisers about sustainability, is just be conscious about what you're doing. And once you're conscious about it, you can then start to track it, and then you can start to mitigate it. But yeah, to be honest, as a business that puts on large scale events, we have 42 employees. We're not a big company. Most of our impact is not from these offices, it's from the other things that we do.
Yeah, okay. There's an initiative called the Better Stands Initiative. Can you elaborate and talk a bit more about that and what it is?
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting, and we've joined up. I'm certainly not an expert on it. Again, Charlie, I'll get you to elaborate. But one of the things that we have found difficult to track, as Charlie mentioned earlier, is exhibitors. And actually, whilst we're not directly responsible for how somebody wants to display themselves within the environment that we create, I think we maybe should start to add some controls, and we should start to give them some insight. And there's kind of 2 ways you do that. You try and lead someone on a journey, or you tell them what to do. And my experience is that it's a lot easier to try and lead someone on a journey than to tell them what to do. So the Better Stands initiative pretty much just scores what people do and gives them some feedback so that they can make improvements. It's certainly not a flawless system, but actually the premise behind it, I think, is really interesting, which is if you can go to every exhibitor and go, hey, you came to this show, you've got a C grade stand in terms of the way that you exhibit. You're a company that claims to be passionate about the environment, you claim to be this, that, and the other, but actually you're having an impact here that perhaps isn't in line with your company values. Could we persuade you to look at doing this, this, and this, which could take you up to a B or an A? Is that fair, John?
Yeah, I think so. So the things I like about the Better Stands is, firstly, it kind of brings to life about how, firstly, the word better is the perfect word. All we're trying to do is be a better business than the year before. We're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to say we're terrible. Whatever stage we're at, it's how can we be better event after event. With the events as well, this particular example, when it comes to stands, it brings to life about the need for kind of efficiency. So a lot of the work we're doing with carbon and reducing it is about how can we be most carbon efficient business of all time? How can we do these amazing events, but with a smaller footprint as possible? And me being outside of the event world, it seems like such a no-brainer when it comes to those stands. Please tell me when I say something wrong, but the idea of someone building up a whole new stand from wood for a 1 day or a 2 day show that's going to cost them thousands, and designing it and building it, and then it goes in the bin on day 3 seems a bit bananas to me, being outside of that world. And so the idea of getting more use out of a stand, whether it's using it again for the next show or whatever it may be, or using less materials for that stand, or less new materials, more of it being recycled, can only be more efficient. It can be hopefully time saving, hopefully saves cost therefore. And if it brings the carbon footprint down as well, that should be great news too.
And I think actually just a word on that, because when I started in the industry 20 years ago, you would see horrific levels of waste outside event venues, post a show, just stuff being thrown in the bin. And it was thoughtless. You don't really see that these days. Actually, most stand contractors have already evolved. So they, just because we're evolving our thinking doesn't mean that the industry is standing still. And actually, most good clients are demanding a sustainability initiative around their stands. So I think if I were to go back in time 10 years and look at what exhibition stands look like today versus 10 years ago, it would be night and day. And I think the improvement is palpable and positive.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, me and Mike, we worked together, sitting next to each other 20 years ago, and seeing the difference. And you know, I often speak about when we were in our office next to each other and we all had bins underneath our desk and they were taken away and there's uproar and everyone's like, I'm never going to be able to live without a bin under my desk. It is just that nowadays you think those little changes that become the norm, and the same for exhibitions, you know, giving away plastic squidgy toys, and that now people don't do that as much. I mean, they're still doing giveaways, but they're trying to think of more sustainable materials. You definitely get a feel that everywhere you go, the industries are changing and doing their bit to do a little bit more. So I do see that as well.
Yeah, it's just very much more conscious. And giveaways is the classic, because it's actually, exhibitions are a way of stimulating trade. They're important. And you know, often one of the things you can do to make yourself memorable is give the people something that they can take home. I think, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. That's a marketing opportunity, and it's got a value, and it's a product that is needed, and it serves a purpose. But actually, just throwing them out willy-nilly is wasteful. Making them from unsustainable materials is wasteful. So again, being more conscious about what you're doing and making sure that it generally does have a purpose. Now, I'm not trying to defend somebody giving away a cuddly teddy bear at a show as being vital for trade. But what I am saying is that these things do still happen, but I think they happen in a much more thought through manner these days. And we've got a long way to go, and maybe that won't be the way it's done in the future, but let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. You have spoken before about events offering a more sustainable option compared to multiple individual trips. Can you talk more about your thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one, because I do think events are an inherently sustainable solution. And I'll take that into two parts. There was some research done by a group of B2B event organizers, and actually it's essentially aggregating travel. So the argument made there was, and I don't have the exact figures, but it was something like you would save 4 or 5 trips, because instead of flying to 4 or 5 different offices to have these meetings, you have them all in one place. So that from a B2B perspective, it's quite a logical and clear saving of time. Why not do all your meetings in one place instead of 5 or 6? Now, some of those meetings are being driven online, but there are some meetings that need to be done in person, and I think that's accepted. And then in terms of our side of the industry, in terms of many of our shows are business to consumer, and they often fill gaps left by high street retail. So we operate in a lot of specialty activity markets. So, for example, in the running market, it's quite hard to find a running shop that carries every SKU of product, every size of shoe, so that you can go and get the kit that you need that fits for you in one hit. So actually, you're probably doing 3 or 4 shopping trips to go and get all the stuff that you need that fits you, which is horrendously wasteful. So if you can aggregate those trips into one venue and create this mega super duper superstore where you can get everything you need in one go, that does feel inherently sustainable. So I think for both B2C and B2B events, there is an argument they are a sustainable solution. I don't think that's a reason to be lazy. And I think in the beginning, a few people kind of went, yeah, we're sustainable, so leave us alone. That's not good enough. I think it is okay to shout about the fact that we are a sustainable solution and try to improve it and make it even better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, even with the trade exhibitions, and you mentioned before, if somebody needs to see multiple of their suppliers, they can do so in one go, in one day. I think for me, it's when I see, the same companies and the same people going to one after the other, after the other, after the other in lots of different countries, when they could just go to the one. I think that's where changes maybe need to be made. But I definitely do think, and there's something for being face to face as well. The importance of that on mental health and being around people and seeing people and being educated in conferences.
There was an argument that you had to push everything online, and it just doesn't work. I think if the COVID pandemic taught us anything, is that human beings crave face-to-face contact, and it's important, it's valuable, it has a business benefit as well as a human benefit, and we shouldn't be ashamed of wanting to have human contact face to face. I think that's actually totally fine. I'd much rather we were doing this all in the same room. I think it'd be better. But it wouldn't necessarily be a necessary trip. So where I think we need to be careful is not necessarily those big trips that have a direct business benefit, like an exhibition, but maybe some of those micro trips when you're going to go and meet that guy who you've already done the deal with, and you're just going to meet him for lunch. Maybe think about like curtailing your business travel in those areas rather than the areas that have a much more obvious and significant business impact.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, you've said a couple of times that the changing definition of net zero, that you don't see how an event can reach net zero anytime soon, but also that you don't think that's an excuse to sit and do nothing. What do you think, both of you think, are the biggest hurdles for event companies? And, a lot of businesses now are being pushed to actively get to net zero through things like SBTI or producing a carbon reduction plan. But it's not easy. What do you think the biggest challenges are? Are there any particular strategies that you're planning that are coming up?
Well, personally, I think it's a busted flush. I think if you are required to account for scope 3, which you are, which is travel, and most exhibition organisers, 80% each of their footprint will be from travel. You cannot change the way the world works as an exhibition organizer. You can encourage and you can move, but I think we have to reduce our emissions by 90% to be net zero. Is that right, Charlie? So that to reduce travel emissions by 90% for the event doesn't feel feasible or possible or frankly fair, because actually that's a problem for the automotive industry, for the travel industry, for infrastructure, and for governments. It's not really to do with me, and it's not something that I can impact. Now I can influence and I can encourage better behaviours, and we intend to do that. I just think it's frankly impossible for us to now get to net zero under those new definitions.
Anything you want to add to that, Charlie?
I would definitely say it is possible. The year it's possible in, I'd probably say is a bit open for discussion, because as Mike says, you're reliant on mainly the airline industry. So they are currently reducing their footprint by about 2% year on year. So that dramatically they need to up their game, as it were, if we're going to hit kind of 2050 targets or earlier when it comes to hitting that net zero guideline. What I would say is for companies listening is obviously it's unhelpful at the moment with the kind of ever-changing guidelines and best practice on what to do. And so it can be easy to kind of just end up doing nothing and just waiting for kind of more guidance. I get that, but it should not be the action people are taking. We don't have, unfortunately, that luxury of time to wait for the new best guidance or the new definitions or new stuff that goes on. So my advice for companies at the moment is to kind of Not worry too much about what year they're going to hit net zero on, and spending months and months and months trying to predict the future of when airlines are going to start reducing by 90% and so forth, and what do hydrogen plane look like and stuff like that, because you're just going to be end up guessing anyway. So I encourage companies at the moment to focus on short-term goals, so stuff in the next 1 to 5 years, and to really focus on that. And the science currently says that actually those are the bits that really matter. What are we going to do as a global population on planet Earth? What are we doing over the next 5 years are going to be where we have the massive impact at all. The idea behind net zero is obviously the fact that firstly, we're not going to get to a place where we have no emissions. It's not just plainly zero, there's still net. So we're trying to reduce as much as possible. At the moment, it's 90%. But the idea of where that came from is to encourage companies just to start and not get caught up on that last 10% of, well, what food are we going to do? We still, even if we just offered chickpeas, that still technically has a carbon footprint. So what the hell are we going to do? So the idea is just to encourage companies to start, but they have to have an element of flexibility in their plan and to evolve it over time. And that also means if people are judging those businesses, they have to have an element of flexibility in their views as well, and encouraging people to try their best, but not to get the kind of waggy finger out at the same time going, oh my God, you didn't do X, Y, and Z, because we haven't got the time for perfection.
Yeah, I do think it's a shame when you see some companies that are hugely sustainable, and you read their impact reports and you see the depth of the work that they've done, and they maybe said one word wrong and they get dragged through the coals. Charlie, you're laughing because you've probably seen it too. And I really think it's a shame when that happens, because what we want to see is companies trying, doing something, and actually just start to do more, rather than being too frightened to say anything about it, because education is key. And I love sharing stories of what other people have done, what other businesses have done, because I think that that's really important. And if people are too afraid in case they say the wrong word, in case they've made the wrong claims and not meant to, then it's going to shut everybody down. So
I think you've also got to develop a reasonably thick skin as an entrepreneur if you're going to put this out there. Social media is a wash with opinions on everything, and particularly around this topic. I think you can often be accused of greenwashing if you put stuff out there. Actually, it can be a real fear from a brand to get someone calling you out. And I'd actually just encourage you to flip that narrative and welcome it, engage, and get people to call you out, because I think the majority of people respond to an honest and open dialogue, and they respect trying, they respect progress. What they will not respect and will not tolerate is inaction. And actually, over time, I do think the net zero definition is flawed, but I don't think that really matters, because the purpose of what we're doing is trying to minimize our impact on the planet and try and be a good business. And if you define that by whether someone calls you net zero or net something else, then what's the point? It's this arbitrary made up standard. You're trying to do a good thing, so do the good thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Something else that's very important is collaboration with your stakeholders, including the associations and your supply chain that you mentioned before. How has Racoon Media Group collaborated with other stakeholders in the events industry? It's quite a close-knit group, isn't it, the events industry?
Yeah, as you know, Sam, everybody in events knows everybody. Actually, it's one of the few things that I think has really brought the industry together, this topic, because actually we've all shared what we've been doing. And I sit on the board of the Association of Exhibition Organisers, and Charlie has to present to the board and talk about what we've been doing and sort of share some of the learnings from that. And he's also working with a number of other organisers to share that insight as well. So collaboratively and collectively, we've done a lot. There is there are a number of different groups that have put together a plan and a roadmap. And what's the organisation, Charlie? The one that we signed up for at gone through my head.
Zero Events.
The Net Zero Events Initiative, that's the one. Yeah, so there's a lot of these things out there, and we're generally just trying to join everything and be part of the conversation. We haven't hung about waiting for them to figure out what to do. And a lot of people have spent a few years getting together some really good advice. And actually, I know a few companies stood by and waited for the advice to come out before they acted, which seemed very sensible. But my principle was, let's try and do what we can when we can, as quick as we can. And let's not wait, because what's the point in waiting? Nothing's going to get better if I do the same stuff today as I did yesterday. So let's make it 1% better today. And then if the standards finally come in and they're set, well, then I can deal with that when they come in. But at least I know I've done some good in the in-between.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, actually, that my last question, you kind of just answered it, that as a leader in the events industry, what can people do? But I think you've kind of summed it up really well. Is there anything coming, like looking right ahead? Is there anything that's coming up, the aspirations or priorities in terms of sustainability? Any new initiatives?
I think I'll take your questions in two. So the first one about what could leaders do, I'd say talk to everybody else, take action, and actually bring someone like Charlie. And there are loads of people out there who are sustainability consultants who will charge you the ends of the earth and actually see this as a way of making money. And without blowing smoke to Charlie, I think he's not that guy. He's someone who genuinely is passionate about what he does. He's not in it to rip people off. He's actually genuinely a business partner, and he's someone we've really enjoyed working with. There you go, free advertising, Charlie. In terms of the future and things that are coming up, I think it's really difficult to predict where that will go. But we are measuring our carbon footprint per visitor, and we're seeing that go down and down and down over the years since we've been doing it. And I think, where did we start? So we 24, was that?
22.
22 kg of CO2 per visitor. And what are we now? I think we're down to 14.
Most recent is 15.
15, okay. So it's moving in the right direction. I think that's positive. As a business, we want to continue to grow. We want to buy more stuff. I want to take over the world and be awesome, because that's just how my brain works. But I don't want to do that without keeping this eye on sustainability, and also making sure every event that we buy, we have a positive impact on the event in terms of the trading. We help it evolve, we help it grow, we help it get better, we do cool stuff, but we also have a positive impact in terms of reducing the environmental impact of the event.
Well, I'm absolutely sure that you are going to do that and do good, from seeing your growth over the last 20 years. It is very inspirational to see what you do and how you're doing it. And, I think having companies like you running exhibitions in countries around the world and thinking about the communities that you're going into is only a good thing. So yeah. But look, thank you, both of you. This has been really insightful, and I'm sure my following is a lot of people in the events industry, so I'm sure they'll get a lot from that as well as yours too. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. It's really appreciated.
Thanks for having us, Sam. You're a legend.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Mike.